A person wouldn't really imagine himself being a victim of a horrendous crime until he was already in it. Like any commoner, I was well aware of the widespread kidnapping that was happening all over the state, but put the worry aside to go on with my daily life. While in the office, we were chatting about how disappointing the recent season of a show was, how we were struggling to cope with our rising expenses, and why one of our office mates was cheating on his wife. Amidst these relatively light yet negative train of thoughts, the heavy topic about the increasing numbers of missing people did not have the chance to be part of the exchange. We came out of the office to have our lunch break, and it was then when it happened. I crossed the road to have a snack at the food stall that I usually went to during short breaks, but I did not make it to the other side. It all happened so quickly that nobody probably saw it. Despite of being a relatively busy area, most of the people there were preoccupied with their own lives with a very limited line of sight. It would be even sadder if someone actually did see what happened to me, but that person didn't care enough to report it. Right in the middle of the road, a black van suddenly stopped just a few steps away from me as I was heading back to the office. Two guys wearing face masks jumped out of the vehicle and forcibly dragged me inside with a single sweep. It all happened in less than 5 seconds. I was completely dumbfounded, and the guys who took me were simply too strong. I wouldn't be able to run away since they appeared just a few inches from me, and I didn't even have enough time to react. Another man was waiting inside of the van, and he immediately covered my head with a black sack as soon as I entered. The two guys who pulled me in pinned me down with their knees against my chest and my legs, and then I felt a cold syringe penetrating my arm. Few seconds later, I completely blacked out. Next thing I knew, I was hanging on someone's shoulder as if he was carrying a mere stalk of meat. My hands and legs were tightly tied. I couldn't tell how long I was unconscious, and I had no idea where I was. I was roughly thrown on the floor, and I hear a number of muffled voices around me. Few moments later, they removed the sack off my head. They gagged my mouth and covered my eyes with strips of cloth. On the very brief moment that I was able to see, I realized that we were inside a very big warehouse. The area was surrounded by heavily armed men. I saw a few container vans as well, and each of them seemed to serve some purpose. When they put some blindfolds on me, I repeatedly brushed my face against the floor regardless of the pain to move it out of the way somehow. Through the small gap between my cheek and my nose, I saw the terrible fate that awaited me and the rest of the victims. The container vans were positioned a few meters away from each other, and each of them was a section for the order of their inhumane operation. They were dragging the victims one by one in the first room where there was a man wearing scrubs. He was taking blood samples and assessing their health conditions. The other container van was well lit and equipped with medical equipment. There were two people who looked like doctors in that area, and they were operating on someone that was shackled on the bed. The closed container right next to the operations section had piles of ice coolers at the front. Based on what I saw, they were clearly harvesting organs. Aside from splitting us open, there was also someone walking around and keenly staring at our physique as if he was grading some products. If he favored them, he would pull them out of the group and his own men would put them in a cargo truck. Whether it was a better way to go or not, I had an idea. They would probably be sold as prostitutes or slaves for the rich people with sick fetishes. Every inch of my body was jittering in fear, and what baffled me the most was the number of victims lying on the floor around me. There were 3 black vans coming in and out of the warehouse, and they were bringing in at least 3 victims with them. It seemed that they were dividing us up by the ranges of our age. Including myself, there were at least 20 victims at the time. All of us were helplessly waiting for our impending demise while our instigators of this cruel operation were casually having a discussion at the far end of the warehouse. Amidst the muffled screams and groans from the victims, the overwhelming volume of their voices were echoing around us. They were too far for me to clearly see their faces, but I could hear them very clearly. 2 voices that sounded like middle-aged men were speaking in foreign tongues, and an English-speaking person was consistently interjecting with the discussion as if he was translating the exchange and relaying it to someone else on the phone. If I had to guess, one of the foreigners sounded like he was speaking Mandarin while the other one was speaking in Russian. According to the news, the main suspect behind the unsolved cases of missing people was the cartel. The group operates in the black market internationally, and the scope of their illegal activities was just as broad as their influential powers in the government. They were right on point with their deduction, but it also meant that there was nothing they could do to spot it. Few moments later, an echoing gunshot sliced through the surrounding noise, which made our hearts skip a beat. When a victim was deemed unprofitable, he or she would be immediately discarded by a simple bullet in the head. They would stock them in a black body bag like rejected products, and they were piled up along with the remains of the goods that were already operated on. Any person, brave or not, would lose all hope when put in that kind of degrading situation. Aside from our imminent deaths, it also felt so horrible that the value of our lives were reduced to such an extent. It would have been better if I was completely unconscious during the process, but if I was, I wouldn't be able to witness the incredible yet profoundly terrifying event that happened next. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have ever believed it. One of the victims on the younger group managed to grind off the gag in her mouth and began to scream aggressively. It wasn't a scream of desperation nor helplessness, but of sheer hatred and strong desire for revenge. She was at least 16 years young, but her bravery was unfathomable. The rest of us were cowering in fear and would beg for mercy if we were given a chance to do so, but she alone remained feisty and daring. She was throwing curses in several languages, which was quite surprising and also unfitting for her seemingly harmless and angelic looks. One of the gunmen approached her and tried to put another gag in her mouth, but she bit off his hand and was actually able to chew off a good chunk of his flesh. Every action she made was utterly shocking, and what she did next had caught the attention of every single person inside the warehouse. The man was pissed and hit the girl on the head with the other end of his rifle. Blood started to gush out from her forehead, but she remained unfazed and rose her head instead. She looked him in the eye despite of having her blindfolds on. Instead of spitting out the flesh that she got from the goon's arm, she swallowed it and yelled, "I would devour all of you. Run if you can, but I will catch you. You have made a very big mistake for bringing me." Before she could finish what she wanted to say, the man shot her in the head point blank to silence her for good. He dragged her body across the floor and tossed her like a lifeless doll on the pile of dead bodies. Perhaps it was out of anger that he shot her again twice before they put her body in the bag. The foreign men and the English translator started to laugh at what the girl did and said, "I admit that it felt quite satisfying to see some resilience and aggression from our end. It was very brief and somewhat foolish, but it was very pleasant to witness." The cruel and inhumane operation proceeded after that unexpected break. Few moments later, the tables were turned, and an unimaginable horror unfolded. While I was waiting for my turn to die, I noticed that the trail of blood from the young girl's body was no longer visible. The goons were not constantly cleaning the blood of their victims off the floor, but it looked as if her blood trail had disintegrated. All of a sudden, one of the body bags rolled off from the pile. Thinking that it was not done properly, the person managing the remains received an earful from their leader. He put the body back to the pile and firmly tucked it in, but it rolled off once again a few moments later. The man was yelled at, and another person was ordered to assist him. But as they were about to lift the body from the floor, the person inside the bag suddenly sat back up. One of the armed men voluntarily stepped forward and shot the body bag a number of times to make sure that the person inside wouldn't be able to survive this time. He told them to check the bag and confirm if the person was dead. However, the body sprung back up once again when he heard the gunman's voice. It was the same man that was bit in the hand and killed the feisty girl, and the person inside the body bag was none other than her. She lunged towards the man and aggressively gripped his thick neck with her fingers sunk deeply through his flesh. As the other armed men immediately reacted and relentlessly fired at the undying girl, the bag was torn off by the countless bullets. However, she remained standing with a sickening grin on her face, and then she completely tore off his throat. She knelt right next to him as he was choking with his own blood, and everyone was completely astounded by what she did next. Just as she said earlier, she pierced her teeth into the dying man's face and bit off his cheek, including the bones. She ripped off his head and began to munch on it while approaching the next gunman closest to her. The rest of the syndicate's crew began to panic, and they all kept on emptying their guns on a single target. I was completely horrified. But at the same time, I was somewhat satisfied by the inexplicable ferocity that was happening right before me. It was like a scene out of a horror movie, and these criminals deserved every bit of this inhumane brutality. This undying girl started to move much faster, and she was ripping off their limbs with her bare hands and sheer strength. She was jumping over their shoulders like a big savage cat hungry for flesh. She wasn't simply killing them, she was feasting on them. The foreign leaders decided to escape from this horrifying bloodshed. They admitted that she was more than they could handle. They had at least 30 men armed with heavy round rifles that could kill a bear in a single shot, and yet they couldn't put down a single enemy. As their vehicles were about to leave the warehouse, the undying girl sprinted towards them on all fours like an animal. She ripped their wheels right off the axle, and then she grabbed their heads through the windshields and crushed their skulls. In less than 10 minutes, she single-handedly brought down the entire operation and killed everyone involved in it. The holes in her body from the countless gunshots that she received began to heal as she was eating their remains. Just like what I noticed before, I saw her blood dissipating into thin air. Without saying a single word to the rest of the blindfolded victims who were completely clueless of the incomprehensible chaos that occurred, she casually left, as if nothing happened. I was the only one who witnessed the horror. To satisfy her rage and bloodthirst, she spared our lives in the process. I never knew who she was or what she was, but I am eternally grateful to her. For the likes of these criminals who showed no mercy to their victims, the punishment they deserved was a gruesome death beyond their wildest imagination.